They say weddings bring families together. But sometimes, they just show you exactly where you stand. My name is Lauren. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me because I need to ask you something personal. Have you ever walked into a room full of people who share your blood, and still felt like a stranger? Like no one really saw you unless they needed something? If that's ever happened to you, I want to know. Drop your city in the comments. And tell me, when was the moment you finally realized you were done begging to belong? For me, it was the day of my sister's wedding. I showed up with a gift envelope I had spent weeks saving up for, $6,800. It wasn't about the money. It was a gesture. One last effort to show up, to be part of the family again. I had it hand-delivered, signed and sealed. And yet, when I walked through those reception doors, no one looked up. No one hugged me. No one said, "We're glad you're here." In fact, I was told I didn't need a seat because it was just a short visit, right? And I wasn't listed for a meal. Not even a water glass at the table. But what cut deeper than all of that was the envelope. It was already opened. Already counted. Like I was nothing but a number. A transaction. A silent ATM that didn't require kindness in return. And I stood there in a room full of relatives I had known my whole life, and realized something so painful it nearly took the breath out of me. They didn't forget me. They just never saw me as part of them. That was the moment my heart broke. Not loud, not messy. Just quietly. Completely. I stood near the edge of the room, holding my coat over one arm, watching the way everyone smiled at each other. Laughter floated between tables. The DJ played a Frank Sinatra song I used to love, and for a second I thought maybe someone would turn around and say my name. Maybe someone would pull out a chair and say, "Come sit. We're glad you made it." But they didn't. Instead, I was handed a shrug by the coordinator. She looked confused when I asked about my seat. Said I wasn't listed. "Maybe you're just here to drop something off?" she asked gently, like she was trying not to embarrass me. And I wanted to believe it was a mix-up. That someone had made a mistake. But then I saw the gift table. And there was my envelope. Laid off to the side like an afterthought. I had hand-delivered it earlier that morning to my mother. Asked her to keep it safe until the reception. She nodded without looking up from her phone. And now here it was, the seal torn, my handwriting smudged, no card in sight. Just the thin white slip and the weight of something that was never meant to be handled so carelessly. I stepped closer, hoping, praying, it was a different envelope. But I knew it wasn't. I recognized the gold trim. The tiny sticker on the back with my initials. Gone now. Peeled off. Something small inside me cracked. And it wasn't just about the money. It was never about the money. It was about what it took for me to give it. The savings I pulled from my account. The shifts I picked up. The quiet, painful decision to go without things for myself just so I could show up with something that said, "I care. I believe in you. I want to be part of this." And in return, I wasn't even offered a chair. I stood there a little longer than I should have, pretending to adjust my purse, pretending I didn't see what I saw. But the truth was pressing against my ribs like a weight I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't a mistake. They knew I was coming. They took what I brought. They just didn't make space for me. I don't think that wedding was the first time they made me feel invisible. It was just the first time I stopped pretending it didn't hurt. Because the truth is, I had spent a lifetime swallowing moments like that. Small ones. Sharp ones. The kind you brush off so they don't break you. But they still leave bruises, don't they? Growing up, my sister was always the bright one. The pretty one. The one my mom called, our little star. And I didn't mind at first. I thought maybe being quiet meant I was just different, not less. But it didn't take long to learn the rules of our family. Her mistakes were brushed aside. My boundaries were seen as attitude. If she slammed a door, she was just stressed. If I needed time alone, I was being difficult. I was 13 the first time I lent her money. Birthday cash from grandma. I gave it up without thinking because she wanted concert tickets. No one told her to give it back. No one even noticed I didn't go to the concert myself. That was the beginning of a pattern I didn't even know I was falling into. When I was in college, my financial aid got delayed. I remember calling home from a payphone crying because I couldn't afford books. My dad sighed and said, "We just paid for your sister's car insurance. Can't you figure something out?" I always did. I worked. I saved. I said no to things I wanted so she could say yes to what she needed. And they never saw it. Or maybe they just didn't want to. Even later in life, birthdays, holidays, I was the one who remembered to call, to send cards, to make the plans. I got thank you texts once in a while, but never that warmth. Never that feeling of being truly wanted. The wedding, it was supposed to be a clean slate. I told myself, this is your chance to start over. Give generously. Smile. Be present. Maybe this time they'll see the effort. Maybe this time they'll see you. But the moment I walked into that reception, I knew better. They didn't forget to seat me. They didn't overlook me by accident. They never made space for me because, in their minds, I was never really in the room to begin with. Just the shadow on the edge. The helper. The person who made things easier by not asking for anything back. And I'd played that part so long I didn't even realize how much it had cost me. Till now. I stood near the exit, coat still folded over my arm, watching the celebration swirl around me like I was behind a glass wall. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, ran past in a white dress, laughing as someone scooped her up and spun her around. Everyone cheered, phones out, flashes blinking. He wasn't mine. I didn't even know whose daughter she was. But the joy around her was warm. Effortless. I hadn't felt that kind of warmth from my family in years. Then I heard a voice, my sister's, just over the music. Oh, you came. That was it. 3 words. Not even a smile to go with them. No, thank you. No, I'm glad you're here. Just a flat statement like I'd done something unexpected. Like I'd shown up where I wasn't supposed to be. Before I could say anything back, someone called her name and she turned away, already laughing again, already surrounded by people who adored her. Like I was a blip on her radar. Barely worth a second glance. A few minutes later, a distant cousin I barely knew passed by. She looked me up and down, smiled awkwardly and said, "They didn't expect you to stay long anyway, right?" Right. Just drop off the envelope and go. That's what they were used to. That's what they expected. No one had ever really asked me to stay. I clutched my purse tighter and walked toward the side wall, trying to calm the heat rising in my chest. The voices, the music, the clinking glasses, all of it felt suddenly too loud. And inside me something went still. Not angry. Not hurt. Just still. Because I knew. I wasn't late. I wasn't invisible. I was unwanted. Not the money. Not the gift. Me. And there, standing beneath a chandelier I helped pay for, watching people toast a future I wasn't part of, I finally accepted what I had been trying to deny for years. I didn't belong here. And maybe I never had. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't shout or slam a door or demand someone fix the mistake. I just took one long breath, walked back toward the entry and picked up my coat. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked where I was going. A few people glanced in my direction, but they looked right through me, like I was another server clearing a plate. And somehow that made it easier. I stepped out into the night air. It was cooler than I expected, soft breeze, stars just barely showing through the lights of the city. I stood on the sidewalk a moment, looking back at the glowing reception hall, the sounds of laughter and music still spilling out like it belonged to someone else's life. And I realized, I didn't want to go back in. Not for dessert. Not for pictures. Not even for closure. Because there is no closure when you're never given space to open. I got into my car, placed my purse in the passenger seat and just sat there in the quiet. My hands rested on the steering wheel for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't even feel surprised. It felt more than anything like an old ache, one I'd carried too long, had finally been acknowledged. And when pain is named, it loses its power. I drove home with the windows slightly cracked, letting the air move through the car like a reset. Streetlights passed in a blur. My phone buzzed once in my purse, but I didn't check it. I knew who it was, probably someone asking where I'd gone. But I wasn't ready to explain. Honestly, I didn't owe anyone that. I pulled into my driveway, stepped into the kitchen, turned on the warm light above the stove. It cast a soft glow across the tile. Peaceful, safe, mine. I set my purse down. Took off my shoes. Put the kettle on. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel after walking out of a family wedding. Peace. Not the kind that comes from pretending everything's okay. But the kind that comes when you finally stop begging to be chosen. When you realize you've been standing in the cold, knocking on a door that was never going to open from the inside. So you turn around and build your own. That night I didn't cry myself to sleep. I just slept. Deeply. Because I didn't leave out of anger. I left to protect what was left of me. And that, finally, felt like enough. I woke up to sunlight pouring through the curtains and the soft hum of quiet all around me. No alarms. No noise. Just stillness. And for once I didn't dread it. But my phone? That was another story. It lit up with message after message. Missed calls, family group texts, 2 voice notes and one not so subtle "Where did you go?" from my mother. I stared at the screen for a long while, thumb hovering over the reply button. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because for the first time I wasn't rushing to smooth things over. I made coffee. Sat at the table with the morning light on my hands. Let the phone vibrate in the other room until it stopped. Eventually I opened the messages. The family group chat was exactly what I expected. Passive concern wrapped in guilt. One aunt had written, "We didn't even get to take a photo with you." Another chimed in with, "You should have said something, we would have found you a seat." As if the absence of a chair wasn't already an answer. Then came the voice note from my cousin Jenna. She'd always been kind but quiet, never got involved. "Hey," she said softly. "I saw what happened. I saw how they treated you. I didn't know how to step in without making it worse, but I just want you to know I'm proud of you. For leaving. For protecting your heart. It was brave." I must have replayed it 5 times. Not because I needed reassurance, but because I needed to hear someone say it out loud. Then came a message from my sister. No apology. Just, "You made it all about you as usual." That one didn't sting like it used to. Because when someone's been served love without effort their entire life, boundaries feel like betrayal. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I recorded one short voice memo and sent it to the family group. I didn't leave early. I left exactly when I realized I wasn't invited to stay. And then I turned my phone off. Because when you've been holding your breath in a room for decades, walking out isn't drama. It's finally breathing. After I turned off my phone that morning, I didn't turn it back on for 2 days. And let me tell you, that silence, it wasn't loneliness. It was peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't need approval. The kind that doesn't check messages to measure worth. The kind that isn't built on holding your breath, hoping someone finally says, "You matter." As I already knew I did. But still, when I finally powered my phone back on, I was curious. Curious to see what silence had revealed in my absence. And sure enough, the group chat had gone quiet. Not one message after I sent that voice note. Not a single follow-up. No, "Are you okay?" No, "Can we talk?" The people who used to flood my inbox when they needed something, a ride, a loan, a last-minute favor, had nothing to say when I needed something simple. Respect. But there were others. The quiet ones. The people I never expected to notice anything, did. My cousin Renee sent a long message the next day. She said she'd always seen the imbalance. The way I got brushed aside. How my sister was celebrated for doing the bare minimum, while I was expected to carry the weight without praise or thanks. "I didn't have the words back then," she wrote. "But I see it now. And I'm sorry I stayed quiet." I didn't need the apology, but I appreciated the honesty. Because that's the thing about family, it's not the titles that matter. It's the behavior. 2 other guests, people I barely remembered from past holidays, sent me private messages too. One of them, a second cousin, said her daughter had asked, "Why was that lady sitting all alone at the wedding?" That lady. That's who I was to the next generation. The quiet figure on the edge of the room. And I decided, I would never be that woman again. The one who shows up out of hope and leaves carrying shame. My sister never followed up. Not once. Not to check in. Not to explain. Not even to pretend she didn't mean it. Because in her mind nothing happened. I didn't make a scene. I didn't challenge her. I didn't disrupt the photos or the schedule or the music. So in her eyes I was just gone. Erased as easily as I had been overlooked. And maybe that was the hardest truth to face. That people don't need to scream at you to break your heart. Sometimes all they have to do is act like your absence is easier than your presence. But here's the part one didn't expect. The more I sat with that reality, the freer I became. I started cleaning out old drawers, deleting old emails, even tossing birthday cards that had meant nothing but habit. And with each little act of letting go, something strange happened. I felt lighter. Not bitter. Not angry. Just lighter. Because holding on, To people, to stories, to one-sided loyalty, it takes weight. And I'd been carrying that weight for decades. I found myself reconnecting with people I hadn't spoken to in years. Friends who knew me outside of family roles. Neighbors who asked how I was doing just to ask, not because they wanted anything. One friend, Maria, invited me over for dinner the following weekend. Her kitchen smelled like garlic and herbs. The table was full. She passed me bread without asking what I'd brought. She didn't even know about the wedding. She just said, "We missed you last month. Glad you're here." And I realized, that was it. That's what family is. People who make space for you. Not just your money. Not your usefulness. I looked around that dinner table and thought, this feels more like home than anywhere I've ever been. And for a moment I grieved. Not for what I lost, but for the time I spent chasing crumbs from people who would never offer me a seat at their table. Not unless I paid for it. That kind of grief is quiet. It doesn't come with sobbing or screaming. It just sits beside you like an old friend and says, "How you know?" And I did. I knew who reached out. And more importantly, I knew who didn't. And not in a vengeful list-making kind of way. Not as fuel for future fights or long-winded explanations. Just, truthfully. Because who checks on you when there's nothing to gain? That tells you everything. I didn't send a long goodbye letter to my family. I didn't need to. My absence was already loud enough for the ones who cared. And for the rest? Well, silence says what words never could. It's been a few months since that wedding, and if you're expecting some dramatic reunion or apology, you won't find it here. The truth is, life doesn't always wrap itself in neat little bows. Sometimes, closure doesn't come with a conversation. Sometimes it comes when you finally stop waiting for one. The first few weeks were the hardest. I still found myself checking my phone more than I wanted to admit, half hoping, half dreading that someone would reach out. That someone, anyone would say, "We saw what happened. We're sorry." But no one did. And instead of feeling shattered by that, I felt clear. Because silence speaks. Sometimes louder than words. And what it said to me was simple. They're comfortable with who they are. But now I'm finally comfortable walking away from it. I started doing little things for myself again. Small rituals. I rearranged my living room. Lit candles that smelled like warm cedar and vanilla. Took myself out for a quiet breakfast one Sunday morning, just because I wanted to sit near a window and sip coffee slowly. I stopped trying to be convenient. I stopped making myself small to keep the peace. I stopped explaining my absence to people who never noticed my presence. And do you know what happened when I did all that? Nothing bad. The world didn't fall apart. My life didn't unravel. I didn't become the villain of the family like I used to fear. Instead, I became something else. Something better. Free. I started spending more time with people who didn't make me question my worth. Who invited me in not for what I could give but for who I was. I shared quiet dinners with friends who asked, "How's your heart?" instead of, "What did you bring?" And I answered honestly. Without shrinking. Without guilt. One of those friends said something that stuck with me. She said, "You know, dignity doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just closes the door and walks away." That's what I did at the wedding. That's what I'm doing now. And I want you to hear this too. If you've ever been treated like the backup plan, the afterthought, the one they only call when it's convenient, you're not the problem. You're not ungrateful or dramatic or too sensitive. You were just giving your loyalty to people who didn't value it. And that's a painful thing to face, I won't lie. But facing it will free you. Because the moment you stop asking people to see you, is the moment you begin to see yourself. And you'll be amazed at what happens when you do. You'll find that peace isn't in the apology you never got. It's in the decision you made to stop waiting for it. You'll realize you don't have to show up at every family gathering just to prove you're loyal. You can choose who feels like family now, based on actions, not titles. You'll remember that love isn't love if it only shows up when it needs something. You'll learn that walking away isn't weakness. It's wisdom. I still think about that night sometimes. That cold reception hall, that opened envelope, that empty chair. And I don't feel bitter. I feel grateful. Because that night didn't break me. It revealed me. It showed me that the person I'd been all along, the quiet giver, the silent supporter, the invisible sibling, she didn't need to be fixed. She just needed to be chosen. By herself. So no, I didn't leave that wedding with applause. No one chased after me in the parking lot. No one wrapped me in a hug and said, "We got it all wrong." But that's okay. Because I left with something they could never take back. My dignity. My peace. My freedom. And if you've ever walked away from a room that made you feel small, I hope you know this. That first step is the hardest. But it's also the most powerful. Because you're not walking away from love. You're walking toward it, starting with yourself.